Okay, we're at what we're calling the French Memorial Trail. This is where we'll find Fort Caroline, or a replica of it, on roughly the same ground. It's not going to be the identical ground like we see at Fort Foster. Some of these other forts, where even other recreations are on the exact same site. This is basically the same area, so we're not going to misrepresent this as being anything other than what it is, a replica on about the same site. We know for a fact the French were here, 16th century. Most of them were fleeing religious persecution. Catholics back in the day, if somebody didn't believe exactly the way they did, would pull out their tongues and burn them to death. I'm pretty sure that's not what Christ had intended when he came down and taught the Gospels, but the Catholics seem to have missed that. Anyway, we're going to creep up on this bad boy here any minute. And we're going to imagine, erosion control. Okay, I'll keep out, no problem. What it would have been like to be here 500 years ago, literally 500 years ago. And what a cool place it would have been. How neat it would have been to see this place at that time. So of course, they built these They typically build these forts on bluffs when they build them on long rivers, so that they can get an advantage of seeing approaching ships at the earliest moment. Oh look, we have some sort of reenactor encampment going on up in here. Having never been here before, and likely never to return, no way of knowing if this is normal or usual, but it is here for now. Very cool. Always adds a little flavor to have people, time period people, hanging out at the site. So we've based this fort on. The original site and exact placement of the colony and fort are still a mystery to historians. In 1964, 400 years after the establishment, the fort you see was built by the National. It is not a reconstruction of the original based on educated guesswork and serves only to bring the fort story alive. So that would have been period illustration engraving. Very neat. So they built their cook ovens outside the fort so it wouldn't get near the powder magazine. interesting, cool way of doing things. Certainly makes sense. Very much similar to those plantations we see where the kitchens are outside in a separate building away from the main house. In that case, it's not for the powder magazine. It's so that if the kitchen catches fire, the whole house doesn't catch on fire. A lot easier to rebuild a kitchen than it is a whole house. Okay, so now we're in it. The reproduction. "400 Spanish troops under de Aviles, Pedro Menendez stormed a sparsely defended fort and massacred 130 people. About 70 colonists fled to the woods or the ships anchored in the river. The survivors made it to ships headed back to France. Imagine they did. On September 23, Menendez left most of his soldiers behind to hold the fort with only 50 men rushed back to defend his newly settled colony of St. Augustine." Yeah, we read about this in St. Augustine, that basically these guys were encroaching on established Spanish property, territory. What was seen by the colonists as free land was seen by Spaniards as encroachment. I mean, this is 30, 40, 50 miles away from St. Augustine. And if memory serves, I know it's on the coast, but I do think you can get to St. Augustine by this river. So it would have been along the river as well. I mean, so it would have been that much more intra waterway. Would have been seen as much more encroachment. It wasn't like these guys were 700 or 800 miles away. These were right here in your backyard. And anytime you have a group of colonists, you got a potential for a militia, for setting up more colonists, bringing in more colonists. So Spanish seem well justified in their efforts to come down here and evict these people. Although they probably did it a little more exuberantly than they needed to. In any event, they got the job done. Who were the African colonists mentioned briefly by one of the Frenchmen? Where did the Spaniards camp? And why didn't Rabal's son Jacques fire his ship's cannon at the Spaniards? No, that's funny. This fanciful 1673 engraving of the fort by a European artist likely never set foot in Florida adds mountain to the landscape and probably exaggerates the complexity and location of buildings. Clearly that would be the case, because we ain't got no mountains up here in Florida. The Spaniards were not done with the French. Menendez tracked down two separate groups at an inlet south of St. Augustine. Menendez ordered his troops to kill nearly all of them, including Rabal, but spared 30 who were Catholic craftsmen or musicians. The inlet became known as Matanzas, Spanish for slaughters, and that's where we get the Fort Matanzas, which is an extremely cool place. Been there several times. This is a nice little reproduction. This would have been a cannon emplacement right here. But it begs the question, where would the ones have been pointing towards the water, which is where the threat would have come from. So regardless of this being a reproduction, it's just very cool to be able to stand on the same spot in the same area of the river where these people built their fort and were ultimately massacred by the Spanish. Incredible American history right here. We're out.